Here we go. Happy New Year. We're going to start doing that every time we start a new. Happy New Year, everybody.
Happy New
welcome
Year.
welcome to Matt and Cheryl's Gen Excellent playlist. It gets more exciting when we start a new year because it's taking longer and longer and longer for us to get through each year as we near the apex of our Matt and Cheryl's Gen Excellent playlist project, which is creating a soundtrack to Gen X life. And we are now transitioning from our childhood years to our adolescence. We're in the junior high era of our lives. 1982, it would have been seventh grade going into eighth grade for me, sixth to seventh for you, correct?
Yeah. And I was still in elementary school because our sixth grade was the end of elementary. Junior high was seventh, eighth, and ninth.
Ah, no, we had middle school. So it's six, seven, and eight, and then high school, ninth grade. I think I said this in our last 1981 show. There's just a tinge of sadness as we move on from that year because, yeah, it's the transition from childhood to adolescence, but also music is changing. We're really getting into the 80s now in 1982, and that'll certainly be illustrated by a couple of these songs that we're going to talk about this week. And changing not for the good, I think. Music video is starting to have a much bigger influence on the industry with the emergence of MTV. The sounds are changing, not for the better, in my opinion. But there were a lot of incredible classic singles that came out during this era. And people of our generation still just really love the 80s.
Glom on to this era of the 80s. Yeah. I'm one of those people.
Nah, not me. No, I love the 70s. I tolerated the 80s. I like the 70s and the 90s much better than the 80s. Musically, culturally, everything. And that's one of the things that kind of intrigues me and excites me about our little project is it's a parabolic curve. We're starting with just a couple of songs at the beginning of the era and a couple of songs when we get to the end, and it will peak in the middle of the 80s during our high school years, an era when I was pulling away from popular music because I didn't really like a lot of it. So we're going to choose the most songs from the middle 80s, which is going to be challenging to find the real gold in that era, for me at least.
Yeah, I agree. It's going to be really interesting and fun because I've already kind of looked forward to like 85 and 86. In my mind, I'm like, there's nothing, but then as I go and look, I realize, oh wait, no, there's things that came out in those years that I liked at the time that were current. And there's also things that were happening in more like college radio and just not in the mainstream. So yes, it may be a little bit difficult for us to pick our global hit and our, our big hit for those years. That's going to be a little bit of a, we'll just have to, we'll be able to figure it out. But
they're definitely
going to be delving deeper into less popular songs and probably albums too.
Yep, you're right ahead of me there, Sheryl. If you look at our playlist that we've compiled to this point, you can find it on Spotify. Sheryl has been curating that. I'm curating a similar playlist on Apple Music, along with our alternate playlist, straight tracks and favorite albums and such. Our playlist so far has been very populist. I mean, it stayed very mainstream. A lot of big hits, a lot of number ones. Most of the songs on there were on the American Top 40, the Billboard Top 40.
And a lot of that was intentional because we wanted them to be recognizable for the playlist.
Part of the rules for choosing songs is they have to be appropriate for a general group gathering. So, we're going to play a lot of obscure, challenging music.
Like Superman, which is why you mixed that from the playlist for Mike.
Exactly. But we've also self-edited too. I mean, there's plenty of songs that we love that, we wouldn't necessarily put on at a party.
Yeah.
But once we get farther on in the 80s, it's going to go off that mainstream.
Yeah.
For sure. Certainly when we pick our favorite songs. Now, one of the rules we've set is that there will be at least 4 big hits. So 2 global smashes, hits that were worldwide, and 2 U.S. number ones. They're songs that were 2 of the most popular of that year in the United States. And that's where we're going to start with 1982. For American music fans, it's going to be a bit of a time warp here. So really started with our 1981 series. We're going chronologically, starting at the beginning of the year and going chronologically to the end of the year. The songs we're going to talk about in this episode, and this is our first episode of 82, really didn't hit in America until end of the year. But that's because U.S. radio was very slow to catch on to these songs and to new wave punk in general.
Or the synth pop, yeah.
Right. The punk new wave era produced a lot of hit songs in England. but had no impact on the mainstream in the United States except for very few up to this point. And 82 is when these songs really started to break through, and MTV really was probably the prime motivator in ushering that in.
Yeah.
Just because of the striking look of a lot of these artists and bands that came out of new wave milieu.
Well, if you're talking about fashion and MTV, I think that you're talking about the Human League, Don't You Want Me, which is a perfect example of a song that basically became a hit because of the visual aspect and MTV in the United States. Most people know the Human League from the number one hit single, global hit. This will be one of our global hits for 1982, the song Don't You Want Me.
Which is actually a 1981 song, as are two of the songs we're going to talk about today, released late in 1981, but popular in the rest of the world before they really had any impact in the United States.
Yeah, they had already released 3 singles from the album Dare in the UK, and they were all hits. And, they were almost to the point where they were like, okay, people are tired of us. We're kind of oversaturated. They didn't even really want to release Don't You Want Me as a single. And Virgin, their label, pushed them to do it. And, it became this unexpected huge hit for them in the UK and the US and worldwide. The Human League had been around since 78. They're one of the first bands that was just purely synthesizers, and they really had like no music background at all. In fact, even after they became huge and put out several albums, well, they didn't really have a lot of albums after Dare, I guess, but Phil Oakey, who's the lead singer, will still say that I have no musical talent.
He was a hospital orderly.
Yes. And he really was initially brought into the band just because he looked like a star. So originally the band, they're from Sheffield, which, if you watch interviews, they talk a lot about how they never left Sheffield.
Northern England, industrial town.
Mm-hmm,
It's a big city.
But they never had thoughts of like going to London. So when they started out, this was right around the time when synthesizers were becoming affordable. The Mini Korg is the one that was kind of like the first affordable synth.
Still expensive, but you didn't have to take out a loan at the bank to
affordable
buy
compared to what synthesizers were just like a few years before.
Right, which were prohibitively expensive. Yeah.
And starting to get more into the range of like how much a guitar would cost. So if you were going to be starting a band, it wasn't out of the realm of possibilities to buy a synthesizer. And the other thing that was just coming on the market at this time was the Linn drum machine. Up until now, there have definitely been bands that were synthesizer based, like Kraftwerk and, Tangerine Dream and a lot of the 70s. But Gary Newman was kind of the first to really bring it into the mainstream and have a hit single with synthesizer music. But he still was coming from a more traditional music background. He played guitar, he had drums, like actual drums on his songs. And
which is, we talked about Cars. I mean, Cars was a great classic Deathless hit because of not just because, but without that incredible drum track.
Yeah.
Played by a human being on a drum set.
Yes.
Would not have been the hit that it was.
And that's part of the thing, too, is when the Linn drum machine came around, not everyone is embracing this technology and, feeling like they are ready to sort of take the human element out of music in that sense. And that's the other thing, too, is that a lot of the synthesizer music before, song structures were not set up like a rock and roll song. So they didn't seem like they were trying to sound like a drum or replace a guitar. The music just didn't even have those elements to it at all. But now, once you get into the late 70s, you have bands like Human League. They're influenced by Kraftwerk, and they're also really influenced by Giorgio Moroder and like I Feel Love, Donna Summer, I Feel Love, and that kind of synthesizer sound.
On our playlist from 1977.
Yes. Originally, the band was called The Future, and it was started by Martin Ware and Ian Craig, and they actually were writing songs, but they were using all synthesizers and drum machines. They were really into science fiction, and Sheffield, was very industrial and had this kind of industrial dystopian feel to it, so they were influenced by that. And I think initially they didn't have a singer, and they knew Phil Oakey from school, so they brought him in as a lead singer, even though he had zero music background. One of the things about Phil Oakey, too, which became sort of a trademark for him, was that asymmetrical hairstyle.
Right.
It really made him stand out. Even in an era where you've got people that are doing some pretty weird stuff as far as fashion goes. But he was also very androgynous. He says there was a time period there for like 10 years where I never wore men's clothing. But he also
But
wasn't necessarily wearing women's clothing
right,
either.
right. Which is true androgyny. You can't really
Yeah.
pin him either, which is pretty cool when you think about it.
It
I mean,
is.
it was very, very methodical the way he presented himself.
Right. In the first couple years of their existence, they were kind of pegged as like a gay band too, because of just the way that he looked in particular. And he was like, well, as far as I know, no one in the band was gay, but it just,
They probably had a big gay following too, I imagine.
maybe, I'm not sure, but I think that it was just that was the initial reaction because of his look. I mean, there were times where he was wearing like high heels and stuff like that, and really going
and makeup.
But I was gonna say, but makeup, yeah, was a
Yeah.
big part of that too. I mean, it wasn't uncommon, even going back to like the New York Dolls and like glam and that, guys were wearing makeup. And definitely, like Boy George, and it became even more popular as we get into the synth era and the more new romantic era. But there was something about Phil Oakey, and he had this way about him where it wasn't even like it looked cutting edge or shocking or anyway. It just looked very natural. Like that's just how he presented himself. And this would become something later once the two girls came into the band, where the three of them, especially he and
Joanne.
they look very similar. They like, it's almost hard to tell them apart sometimes. So they actually put out 2 albums as this original incarnation of the band. Didn't have any hits from those albums.
If you watch the documentary, their whole goal was to have hit pop songs with only synthesizers and electronics. And Gary Newman kind of beat them to the punch, and they're a little miffed about that.
Yeah, they were, especially because Gary Newman came from a more rock background. They were like, out of nowhere, here he is with just synthesizers, and where'd this guy come from? We've been doing this for 2 years.
Right.
I mean, David Bowie saw them in 1978, saw a live show of theirs and declared that they were the future of pop music. But around the same time, when their first single, Being Boiled, was released, it was released on an independent label. And they also did sessions for John Peel at that time. They had a review of the album in the NME, New Musical Express. And Johnny Lydon was one of the guest reviewers. And his review was 2 words: trendy hippies. I mean, you would never look at them and think they were trendy hippies, but the song Being Boiled does have a lot of references to Buddhism and like vegetarianism and stuff like that. So I don't know if he was just taking that from the lyrics or who knows. But one of the things that they were doing at this time, they brought in another friend who had an art and photography background, because their live show was pretty boring. It's just guys standing there at keyboards, and they'd actually even have like the reel-to-reel tape machine on the stage with them, where you'd have a drummer, let's say, they'd have that.
Which I think is pretty cool.
They just felt like their stage show was pretty boring. So they asked him to show slides behind them. And so when they started doing that, it did liven up their show a little bit. And then Adrian Wright just kind of became part of the band. He started playing synthesizers. So after the first 2 albums, they did have one performance on Top of the Pops. It was actually a remake of Gary Glitter's Rock and Roll Part 2, which is kind of strange. But that's like one of the only performances that does have Phil Oakey, Martin Ware, and Ian Craig together. Because now we get to the point where Martin Ware and Ian Craig are not really seeing eye to eye with Phil Oakey. And so they actually split apart. They go off and first they actually form something called the BEF, which stands for the British Electric Foundation, which they were just going to be producers. And I didn't know anything about this until just recently when I started looking into this more. And it's pretty interesting because they did put out a couple albums that were sort of like instrumentals, kind of Brian Eno-ish. But their third album was, they had a bunch of guest vocalists come on. And one of those vocalists was Tina Turner. And she did a version of The Temptations' Ball of Confusion. This came out in 1982. And it drew attention from Capitol Records, and that's how she got signed to Capitol and started her second phase of her career.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did not know that.
Yeah. After that, she had a single of Al Green's Let's Stay Together that was produced by Martin Ware, and it's very synthesized. It has a lot of synthesized. It's actually pretty interesting, and so is her version of All Confusion. And Let's Stay Together peaked at number 6 for her on the UK charts. And that's how she started one of the biggest comebacks in music history, really.
Yeah.
So anyway, at the same time when they were doing this BEF, they also formed Heaven 17, and they went on to have hits in the UK. But what that meant was Phil Oakey and Adrian Wright were now left with the name Human League and basically what would have been like £250,000 bill for canceling the tour that they had, the upcoming tour, if they did not follow through with that. Phil and Adrian were the two least accomplished as far as musicians. They weren't the songwriters. I mean, that was the biggest thing, is they didn't write songs. So now they had to figure out what they were going to do with themselves. And Phil Oakey knew that he wanted women in the band. He knew that that was going to be the next step for them, was to find some women to be in the band in some form. So they go to a club and they see Suzanne Sully and Joanne Catherall, who were 17-year-old students at the time, and they're dancing in this club. And he's like, I really like their style. Now, they knew who Phil Oakey was because they were actually fans of the Human League. They were fans of the band. They had seen them live. So he comes up to them and says, I want you to join the band. And they're students living at home with their parents. So they talk to their parents and talk to the school, and they all come to this agreement that, well, we think that it would be a good experience for you girls to go travel while you study. And and so they agree to let them go with this guy, Phil Oakey, and these two guys that they
this
know
weird
nothing.
guy with this asymmetrical haircut.
Yes. And it's funny to watch interviews with them because they're like, I don't know what our parents were thinking,
Right.
But it was decided that it would be a good experience for them. And so they did. So they went on this tour. It was just like a month-long tour or something. And actually, they even say that they had tickets to see Human League on this tour, the tour that they were actually going to end up being in the band. So once they were brought into the fold, they actually got panned by the music press on that tour. They were known as Oakey and his Dancing Girls, is basically what was written up about them. And I think there is kind of, some question of how much the girls were involved as far. I know that they're singing and they're obviously a visual aspect of the band. But Phil Oakey says that they were very pivotal in knowing what songs were going to really be hits. They just had a really good sense in that way and did direct the band a lot. They didn't write music, but they were definitely pivotal as far as the image of the band. And that will come along later, especially with MTV. So at this point, they're signed by Virgin Records.
Yeah, they'd been on a independent label, Fast Records, before that.
Yeah, their first single, The Sound of the Crowd, became their first top 20 single in the UK. And now they're on top of the pops. In fact, the girls talk about this too, how their mom is going to the school and saying, we need to get Susan and Joanne out of class because they're going to be on Top of the Pops tonight. They need to go to London to film Top of the Pops because they're still in school. So there's 3 singles that are released before the album, Sound of the Crowd, Love Action, and Open Your Heart. And Love Action, Open Your Heart are top 10 singles. I love all of those songs. And then Dare's
It's a great album.
Such a good album. Dare's released in 1981. It goes to number 1 in the UK. So they release those singles and then they go in to record the album. And that's when they bring in Joe Callis from the Rosillos. The Rosillos were a band that they had toured with. He was the guitarist for the Rosillos, but they brought him in and he switched to synthesizers because they don't have guitars. And he's a songwriter. So now they actually have a songwriter in the band. So then they go on to record the Dare album. Those 3 songs are hits in the UK, but they still have zero impact in the US. And Dare came out in 1981. They were produced by Martin Rushent, and he really helped kind of coalesce a sound for them too. So they did have a producer on board that was helping drive this project.
Yep. Punk producer, produced the Buzzcocks records, produced the Stranglers.
Yes. So now, they've already had 3 hit singles, and Simon Draper from Virgin, he really wanted them to release Don't You Want Me as their 4th single. And they were reluctant. I mean, it's not surprising actually, because Don't You Want Me is the last song on Dare. And usually people don't put a
No.
song that they think is going to be a hit for them last on the album. And Phil Oakey really didn't like the song. He wasn't really
Except
interested.
London Calling, where the song's not even listed on the credits.
Well, that's
Train in
true. That's a
Vain.
very
Yeah.
unique situation. Yeah. And I think that's because it was an afterthought to put it on the
Yeah.
album. And oftentimes that will happen where there's a song that becomes a hit and then later they'll put it on the album. But this song was on the album and they just weren't ever intending to release it as a single. When they released it, they also made a video for it. So the video was actually directed by Steve Barron, who he went on to produce some of the biggest videos ever made, like Billie Jean, Take on Me, and Money for Nothing. But this was one of his first videos. There's so much going on with this video that makes it interesting and that is also a reason why this song became such a hit. I mean, you have the visual aspect just of the band members, but the song tells a story, which is also another reason why I think this song really caught on so much too, is the song tells a story. And in the video, they're telling a story. It's like a film within a film, kind of within a film, where they're making a movie or something in the video. But then they kind of walk off the set, and then it's sort of like breaking that fourth wall. And then you also have them sitting in the movie theater watching the movie, the band themselves. So it's kind of an interesting concept. And it just looks really good too. It's filmed at night outside and just really has a vibe. So it becomes a huge hit, a number one hit in the US, in many parts of the world. And all of a sudden now they're like superstars. They can't go to shows anymore. They can't walk around and not be recognized. And I mean, they're pretty recognizable anyway, but before nobody cared about them. They were almost like a joke. I mean, they say we were kind of a joke in Sheffield. Like nobody took us seriously.
Which is understandable because they're complete amateurs, honestly. I mean,
Yes. Yes, they are.
there's nothing punk about their music, but they are the epitome of the DIY, the do-it-yourself spirit of punk music. I mean, these complete amateurs had no musical training, little musical ability other than appreciating music. Phil Oakey's a fine singer. I mean, he's got
Yeah.
a good voice.
He has an
But
interesting voice too, and he does have a
yes,
distinct
yeah.
voice. Yeah.
And he's an interesting guy. I mean,
Mhm.
I've seen a few interviews with him. He's just very down to earth, genuine, nice person.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, they're up there and they're doing it. They have, I mean, they're basically just jumping into the fray. We don't need to have all this musical knowledge or ability. We've got these keyboards that make all these fun, interesting sounds,
Yeah, which
and
is
they're up
why
there on stage.
once these keyboards became affordable enough, this synth pop music is actually even more DIY than punk, really, because you
Right?
you
Yeah.
don't even have to know three chords. You don't have to know anything. You just have to know how to push a button or well, sometimes you do have to have enough of a sense of how to program the computer. So
Right. Yeah.
you've got people coming from a different mindset that are now able to create music on these machines, these computers that don't require music knowledge. And that's exactly where they came from. But with that, they actually created, one of the best albums of the 80s as a full album all the way through. It's my favorite synth pop album, that's for sure. So it definitely for that genre, it's number one.
It's definitely up there in the synth pop genre, no question. Martin Rushent's a great producer. It sounds good. There's great pop songs on there. It's funny that, Phil Oakey really didn't like the song very much and was quite adamant about not wanting it on the record, not wanting it released as a single. I mean, there's a reason it was last on side 2. He just didn't think it was that good. And he
Yeah.
was furious when Virgin wanted to release it as a fourth single from the record. But
Mhm.
that's the one that caught on in the United States. And, obviously there's a strong visual element to the band, but I wouldn't have known any of that as a young listener. I mean, I just heard it on the radio and found it really striking and interesting. And like you say, it tells a story, and it's very interesting because it's the male female perspective on the breakup of a relationship. And it kind of
Mhm.
illustrates that toxic male possessiveness when it comes to, relationships where he's like, you were nothing when I found you. And now
Yes.
you're, everything you are,
Is
it's
because of
because of
me.
me. And she's like, you know what? I've had fun. It's been great, but I'm ready to do other things with my life and be on my own and be independent. And the guy just goes off the deep end and can't handle it. It's a sad human story that's all too
Yeah.
common, unfortunately. But that's what makes it interesting. So you've got the male and the female perspective, the male singing his perspective, and the female singing hers on the song, which is kind of original.
Yeah, it is. And it's one of the few songs where it's Susan that sings on this one, takes a verse. So they do have that back and forth dialogue. And I think that one of the things that did make this song such a hit is what you said about hearing the song on the radio and not seeing the video. It did have such a great visual aspect around it too with the video, but it's a really good song and it sounds really good on its
Oh,
own.
it's a great.
So
It's
those two
the
combined
riff hooks you in
together,
right away. The riff hooks
yes.
you in. Dum dum da
Dun,
dum
dun, dun,
dum
dun,
da da
dun,
dum
dun, dun,
dum.
dun. Yep. Yeah, it's
And
got a great
the
catchy riff to it. I think the vocals are really good. I love Phil Oakey's voice. And even though he doesn't look masculine because he's wearing a lot of makeup, he has a very deep masculine
yeah,
voice, which is also what makes it kind of an interesting visual with him too, with that deep masculine voice with a very non-masculine appearance.
which is why he wanted girls in the band. He wanted vocal contrast on the
Yes.
record, so he wanted higher voices.
Mm-hmm.
But just the way he went about doing it, I mean, everything was just kind of seat of the pants and off the cuff and very down to earth about the way they approached their career. There's a real humanity to this guy. He's very loyal to people. And once they're this huge worldwide smash act, you'd be thinking, okay, for the next record, we better step our game up, get real musicians in here, real singers. But no,
Yeah.
he stayed loyal to all these people
Stayed
around
loyal
him.
to them, stayed in
Yeah.
Sheffield, stayed loyal to, like, they were just who they were. They didn't change them in that sense.
And actually, he was romantically involved with Joanne for a
Yeah,
long
from
period of time.
80 to 88.
Yeah.
So pretty much all through the height of their career.
I wanted to share another thing about this. So I have this great memory from when I was in, I guess it would have been 8th grade, spring of 83. Family took a trip to visit my grandparents, but we went out to this restaurant. There used to be this chain of restaurants in the Southwest called Bobby McGee. I'd never been to a place like this before. So it was a chain, but it was kind of like a combination restaurant nightclub, and all the wait staff would dress up in costumes and they would play characters. They'd be serving you, but they'd also be putting on like shows pretty much at your table. There was also a nightclub. So, I mean, where we were sitting was not far from the entrance to the club. It's dark in there and you can see the flashing lights and stuff. But I would have been, 13? I was too young to go in there. I would have been 21 and over. And I could hear that song playing in the club. And I knew the song at that point. Obviously this is well after it was the number one hit in the United States. And I just remember sitting at the table thinking, God, I can't wait till I'm older and I can go in to cool places like that. But I just remember hearing that song booming out of the nightclub and thinking, God, that's where all the cool people are. I want to be in there.
Well, they were cool, but they didn't stay cool long after this album. I mean, it took them almost 2 years to put out a second album. They did have a couple singles. They had Fascination was one that I do remember hearing on the radio and seeing the video all the time on MTV. But they just couldn't get it together. And it took so long that their second album really didn't do anything. It wasn't really that well received.
Fascination was a pretty big hit for them in
it was,
the
and they had another song called Mirror or something that was a hit in the UK, but that was the only other song they had. Nothing else on that album was a hit. And one of the things that I really like about Phil Oakey too is there's one of the interviews I saw, interviewer had asked him, like, what do you think is the recipe for success behind you guys? And he was just like, it was luck. He says it basically was just good luck that they became popular. They
very
were
matter of fact
promoted,
about everything.
They were never promoted and did not tour in the US. They had played very few shows in the US. It was the song and the video is what propelled them, but they didn't have any promotion from the record label. He's like, it was just luck, the right thing at the right time. They did have another number one song with Human that came out in the later 80s, but that's
a really good song.
It is, but it's really not, it doesn't sound like them. And it kind of, you know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of the hits that Heart had during that time, like the hits that were on that Heart album. because it feels like a song that was written for them to be a hit. It's not a bad song, but all that time, they did put out a few albums here and there. Like you said, it was still the same core band members. They didn't bring in any different people. But then by the time I think they got to Human, when they were recording that song and that album, it was just Phil Oakey and the two girls and Susan and Joe.
Yeah, Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis actually produced that hit.
Yeah.
I don't really remember loving that song at the time, but going back and listening, it's like, that's a really, I mean, it's of the era for sure,
Yeah.
but that's a really good song.
That's actually, I think, what's going to happen once we do get into those years is there's also going to be songs that we knew at the time that we were like, man, I don't want to hear that again. We didn't care about that. We'll kind of be able to reassess and reevaluate now.
Well, another song that came out in 1981 but didn't hit until 82 in the United States. This song and this band were pretty much inescapable on the radio and MTV at a certain point, completely saturating the market. But again, took a long time for the American record company and radio stations to pick up on this, despite it being a huge hit all over the world. Really, the United States was the last to fall. We're talking about the band Men at Work. This is their second big hit, Down Under, which is the song that's most associated with them now. I find it interesting, though, retrospectively, as far as music appreciation is concerned, I think one of their later songs is a song that more people really love now than
Overkill?
then. Overkill, which is just a great song, which came off their second record. But at the time, this was the one song that most people identified with this band, and it's Down Under. And all of a sudden, Australia just was the coolest place on earth. You could not escape all things Australia.
Like, this has to be the first time most people, well, especially in the U.S., had ever heard of Vegemite.
Right, yes. So their first hit song was Who Can It Be Now? Now, both of these singles were released in 81. Big hits in Australia and then New Zealand next. I was surprised to read this, that they were the first Australian act to have a number one hit in New Zealand. You would have thought there would have been tons of crossover between those two countries over the years, but apparently not.
No Bee Gees hits in New Zealand?
I guess not. So as far as Australia is concerned in music, you had the Bee Gees, you had Little River Band, of course, had a bunch of hits in the United States. Rick Springfield had the big hit with Jesse's Girl the year before. But, he was Australian, but he
felt very Americanized.
Right, because he'd been on the American soap opera for years. And he didn't really have much of an accent anymore. And the Bee Gees, likewise, were not truly Australian. But who is truly Australian?
Right.
The Aboriginal people, obviously. But, Australia is a country made up of immigrants. And Colin Hay, the lead singer of Men at Work, like the Young Brothers and Bon Scott from AC/DC before, a Scottish immigrant. His family emigrated in 1967. Went to university in Melville, La Trobe University, and that's where he met a couple other members of the band. He struck up a musical partnership with Ron Strykert, who was the lead guitarist in Men at Work. I'd always thought that all the guitar parts, all the lead guitar parts in the Men at Work stuff, that was Ron Strykert. Colin Hay is actually a hell of a guitarist. I mean, he's a lead guitarist in his own right. I mean, they're both quite talented musicians.
And that became more apparent as he started to go out on his own and do like solo acoustic shows. And that's how Overkill got so popular too, was his solo acoustic version.
I had no idea the level of his musicianship until I started researching for this and looking at stuff on YouTube and seeing his solo stuff. Guy's a hell of a guitar player. I mean, we all knew he was a great singer.
Yeah.
They were often compared to the Police. And I think the main reason for that, I mean, there's a couple of reasons, but his vocal register is very similar to Sting's. So they're in that upper register, but Hay is a much stronger vocalist.
He has a stronger voice, yeah.
Right. Strong and great control in the upper register, and he still maintains that. He must be close to 70, if not beyond 70 now, and he still can hit those high notes with power. It's incredible. But really great singer. He came from a musical family. His family owned a music shop where they lived in Scotland before they immigrated. So, steeped in music from a young age. So, he and Strykert start performing as a duo. Band starts to coalesce. They start playing clubs and pubs. There's a really good doc on Colin Hay. I highly suggest watching. Now, it's flawed. It is flawed because there's some big holes in it.
Like, they
But
totally discount their last album altogether,
their
the
last,
Men at Work
well,
album.
yeah. I mean, they kind of brush over the breakup of the band and their
Yeah.
third record, which was a flop, which really isn't any good,
Yeah.
sadly. I don't think they even say the name of the album in the
No, they
documentary.
don't. They don't even
It's,
mention the name. Yeah.
it's called Two Hearts. But it's amazing how big this band got. They were they were the biggest band in the world for a period of time. There's really no argument about it. I mean, they were huge worldwide.
Yeah.
And because of the delay in getting their music released in the United States and on the radio, their first two albums kind of started. They had to
Overlapping.
delay the release of the second album because the first album was really only just hitting in the United States, and they'd already had this backlog of material. So as a result, you get saturated with their music.
There's always this fine line that bands have to walk between, releasing an album soon enough so that people don't forget about you, but not oversaturating.
Exactly. And that may have played a part in their eventual downfall, but I don't know, because Cargo, the second record, is very strong too. And the singles are great. It's really just a crappy third album that, plus the usual band infighting and stuff where they fell apart. So they released an independent single called Key Punch Operator in Australia in 1980. And the B-side of that is a song called Down Under, which is a different arrangement version of the song that will later become a big hit. And it's interesting to listen to. It's slowed down. And because of the slower tempo, you really get more of the reggae feel to the beat of it.
Also kind of Police-like. I mean, bringing in reggae. And
Yeah, there are certainly similarities to the Police. Musically, they're kind of a watered down Police.
Yeah.
Now, they're really good musicians. Now, if you watch the live clips, they're tight as hell. I mean, they're really tight on stage. But, the rhythms are much simpler. I mean,
you don't have Stuart Copeland.
There's no Stuart Copeland playing the drums. Now, their drummer is good. Jerry Spicer's, he's a muscular drummer, but it's pretty much straight 4/4, and there's not a lot of fancy flourishes. It's pretty stripped. And the stripped down production of their eventual album, Business as Usual, they signed on with an American expat named Peter McKeon, who really doesn't have any credits outside of Men at Work of note, but he simplified their sound. Now, you listen to that first single, obviously the recording quality is lesser because it's a small budget independent release, but they're kind of coming more. So now people think of Men at Work as part of the new wave group, but they're coming less from a punk angle and more from like a pub rock influence where there's much better musicianship. And the arrangements are fussy. There's a lot of intricate instrumental stuff on there, guitar work, bass work. All of that gets very much simplified by the time they record the album. And obviously the sound quality is much better, and they're in a better studio and such. So the band, it's Hay and Stryker, and now you've got John Reese on bass, the drummer Jerry Spicer, as I mentioned, and the secret weapon in this band is the multi-instrumentalist Greg Ham. So he plays woodwind instruments and keyboards.
He's the one sitting up on the tree playing the flute in the video.
Exactly. And he even takes a lead vocal on one song on the album, his own composition. So the first single from the new record, Who Can It Be Now? They've been building up a following in Australia, and record labels were competing to sign them up. They signed with CBS Records in Australia, and Who Can It Be Now becomes a hit record pretty much right out of the chute in Australia. And you can see why Men at Work were so big, because it's just weapons grade hooks. Both of these first two singles, they hook you in immediately, right from the first beats of the record. Now, Who Could It Be Now has that little drum beat, and then in comes that sax riff, which is immediately you're in.
Oh,
and it sounded so good on the radio when it first hit. The first two singles were released late 81 in Australia. And then again, big hits in Australia, big hits in New Zealand, now continental Europe, and then Canada. It's a big hit. So it's just right across the line from us. But the American record company, CBS, Columbia, still just, they had a couple of opportunities. No, we don't hear any hits here. What? Who's listening to this record?
Yes,
not hearing hits.
The whole album is so good. Yeah.
I know. UK finally falls under their spell, and then finally it gets a US release. So we're well into 82 before Who Can It Be Now is even released. So at this period of time, I'm listening to KNBQ. That was my station. And I'm starting to tape stuff off the radio at this point. I got my sound design all in one system, with the turntable and tuner. It had an 8-track slot. I don't think I ever played an 8-track tape on it, never owned one. But I started using that cassette deck for sure and started recording stuff off the radio like a lot of people did back then. But Who Can It Be Now sounded so good on the radio. And then comes their second single, Down Under. And again, the first beats of the record pull you in right away with that ding, 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 a ding, ding, a ding, a ding, a ding. He's striking bottles with different levels of fluid on it. Originally on the demo, I think he's doing bottles. So I don't know if it's actual bottles on the recording or if it's a synthesized approximation of that, but that's interesting. And then it goes into that flute riff. It's just a great hook, and you're in immediately.
Super catchy, yeah.
And then the lyrics, and you're like, what is he talking about? Fried out combi, hippie trailhead full of zombie, Vegemite sandwich. It's just bizarre stuff. It's all like Aussie slang. It's telling a story of a Australian traveling the world, and he keeps bumping into people from his homeland and making him feel at home. So you already mentioned the Vegemites, and nobody in America knew what Vegemite was unless you visited Australia. But it's a big, big thing in Australia. It's a spread that comes in a jar.
It's a fermented yeast spread.
Sounds. I've never tasted it.
I like it.
Absolutely. Oh, you do?
Mm-hmm.
When did you first try it?
Just like maybe 10 years ago. But I actually like Marmite better. It tastes a little bit different, but it's very similar. I have some in my cupboard right now.
You're kidding me.
No. You spread it on really thin. And that was one of the things that I remember seeing about Vegemite, is that people would talk about how like Americans think about spreading peanut butter or jelly and how thick you do it, and you cannot do that with Vegemite. You do like a very thin layer of butter and then a very thin layer of Vegemite. So there's a certain way that you have to prepare.
So is it just curiosity that led you to get, or did you have it somewhere? Or
no, I just thought, I've always kind of wanted to try it and see what it's like. And I couldn't find Vegemite for a long time. I could find Marmite, which is popular in the UK. And you can get it at like British stores and stuff like that.
And is it the same thing?
It's similar. It's almost the same thing. There's a little bit differences. I don't know what, but it's a very acquired taste. It's weird. It's very strange, but I like it.
So anyway, the lyrics come in and immediately you're just like, what is this guy saying? Traveling in a fried out combi on a chippy trailhead full of zombie. So fried out combi. A combi is like a camper van, like a VW bus. Fried out meaning just knackered, to use a British equivalent, beat up, falling apart. Hippie trailhead was just kind of like this European trek that a lot of young people took, a lot of hippie types back in the day. Head full of zombies, a reference to like strong marijuana, I think, which I never got until recently. Hippie trailhead full of zombies. I thought not head full of zombie. I thought it was a hippie trailhead full of zombies is what I thought they were saying.
Oh, yeah.
And then later on, the Vegemite sandwich and such and such. So these songs are just so catchy. Colin Hay's voice is so striking and powerful. And really, when you listen to the track, this is where the 80s are starting to arrive musically in not such a great way. So, again, back to the Police comparison. The drum sounds. So the Police drum sound, the drums are still sounding powerful and natural. But on the Men at Work album, this is the more modern sounding drum, which is that snare that just goes splat, which is all over 80s music, which I don't really care for. But there it is, and it's the new thing, it's the modern thing, it's the trend, and they're on the leading edge here with this record. But the U.S. finally falls under their spell, and this doesn't actually hit number one on the U.S. charts until 1983. I mean, it was January of 83 when this got to the number one spot in the charts.
And probably more play on MTV helped them too.
Yeah.
And, that video, when you talk about the lyrics, the only way to really even understand that is to watch the video. And it's like, it seems like they made the video to be like, okay, here's what we're talking about,
Right.
and
It's
here's a
literal.
visual of all these
Yeah.
things. Because otherwise, not only is it really even hard to understand what he's saying, but even if you could understand the words, you still don't know what they mean, or what he's talking about. So I think the video was a big deal for them.
Here's an interesting angle too with MTV. So we signposted back in 79 when we got into this era. I've been fascinated with the 79 to 81 era, the pre-MTV era of pop music, because you still had these old singer-songwriter types having hits, these fat, bearded, ugly guys having hits.
Unattractive people.
Right. So Men at Work, they're not exact, Colin Hay is no pinup. I mean, he's just a pretty average looking guy. He's kind of got a big nose, receding hairline, this close cropped haircut.
He's no Simon Le Bon.
No, exactly. That's exactly the joke I was going to make. You beat me to it. He's no Simon Le Bon for sure. Duran Duran is coming down the pike. You better watch out, Colin. But in 82, when Who Could It Be Now and Down Under were released in the U.S. and were big hit songs, a lot of people still didn't have MTV yet. We didn't have MTV in our house in 82. I don't think we had it until probably late 83, because I remember watching Friday Night Videos pretty religiously when that show first came on the air.
I did too. Yeah.
And then, that was on NBC late night Friday nights.
Mm-hmm.
And then once MTV became more widespread, it kind of made Friday Night Videos redundant.
Obsolete. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's still music. It's still what you're hearing that's sucking you in at this point, at least in my household on my radio. And it's all about the songs. It had nothing to do with what these guys looked like. It didn't matter.
Well, I think that's what I was saying about like Don't You Want Me? There's the combination. The ones that really stood out the most for me were the ones that had both the song and the video, because then I was getting it in more than one format. Like I wasn't just listening to the radio and hearing it. I was also seeing the videos or seeing it on MTV. And, I enjoyed watching the visual aspect. And it wasn't always like for Men at Work, it wasn't looking at the guys or how they looked or that. It was more about telling the story of the song in a visual way, in a little mini movie. And their videos were always kind of like that. Like they were they very much had that storytelling, because the songs just, I guess, lent themselves to that too. Who Can It Be Now? Not as much. That one feels more low budget, but the video to Be Good Johnny, that has a storytelling kind of aspect to it. I remember seeing that one a lot. But yeah, when there was a song that I liked and it had a video I liked too, then that was just the ultimate.
So Who Can It Be Now, the first single from Business as Usual, comes out initially in May of 1981 in Australia. It would be about a year later when it's released in the United States. So it had been a smash around the world. And finally, the U.S. record company relents, releases it. And sure enough, it hits right away. As soon as radio programmers get a hold of it, they're like, yeah, this is a winner.
That was a long time.
For a long time. And you just wonder, who's the idiot that didn't hear the potential in these songs at this time? It seems pretty obvious looking back. But there is this wariness, I think, about new wave music. And I think the perception was that's where these guys are coming from. And like, nah, that's not for an American audience,
I don't know. It's funny because I don't think of Men at Work as being overly new wave sounding, especially when you listen to the album. It feels more rock based to me. It's not like Safety Dance or something like that.
Right.
There's songs where you're just like, that is new wave. This doesn't feel like that to me. It feels more like the Cars or something, or although they were kind of considered new wave, but they were more in the rock vein. And maybe if they wouldn't have started right when new wave was big, they wouldn't have been lumped in so much into that category.
Well, and you look at the bands that were popular in the U.S. that were considered new wave, like the Cars, like Blondie. They're only kind of tangentially there. I mean, Blondie, their breakthrough hit was a disco song. It wasn't a punk song.
But that's why I'm saying it might be because of just when they were introduced into America. When they were introduced into America, new wave was the popular music style. And if they would have started earlier, like the Cars did, like Blondie did, they had albums out in the late 70s. Our first introduction to them wasn't when new wave was at its height, where it was with Men at Work. I don't think that they can be pigeonholed in that way as a new wave band. They sound more rock to me. And their album has a lot of great songs on it. It's a really, really good album.
And it does cross over. It wasn't just Top 40 Radio. They crossed over into AOR2. And actually, the third single had staying power on FM rock radio, at least in the Seattle market. I remember hearing Be Good Johnny.
Me too. I remember hearing Be Good Johnny on AOR radio. Yeah.
Yeah. But you're right. It's a good album start to finish. Be Good Johnny, the third single released. It was the only single on side 2 of the album. Then it ends with Down by the Sea, which is a cool atmospheric closer. Greg Ham's song is the Helpless Automaton on the, or Automaton. They must pronounce it in Australia.
Yeah.
But who could it be now as the lead track on side? Well, then I Could See in Your Eyes. That could have easily been a hit single too.
I love that song. That song is so good.
Yeah.
I think the first 4 songs are great because I really like Underground too. And then side 2, I like Be Good Johnny. I've always liked that song. But I think the last couple songs on side 2, Touching the Untouchables and Down by the Sea, well, actually in Catch a Star too, the last 3 songs, they're kind of more sophisticated, the song structure, and they have really cool guitar riffs.
Yeah, these guys could play. I mean, they were really good musicians.
Yeah. I never owned this album in the 80s. I was really surprised actually when I went and listened to this album because, like I said, I never owned it before. So I really never listened to anything but the popular songs and the singles. And it's really, really good. And I'm a little dismayed by how few really good albums all the way through I have found in the last, starting with the 80s, really.
Yeah.
Even the albums that I thought I really liked, that I thought were good albums that I remember liking, back then, go back and listen to them now. I'm like, that's not really that good. It's not that good. But this was very surprising to me because I think it's one of the best albums that I've heard so far between 1980 and 1982.
So I don't want to talk too much more about what's to come for Men at Work, because I'm pretty sure we're going to have at least one more Men at Work song on our playlist, because they had 2 incredible singles off their next record too, which are both certainly in the running for me for 1983. But it's pretty amazing the fall from grace that happens here and how quickly it happens for a band that is just dominating the world music scene. And then within a couple of years, they no longer exist. And I think you're the same as me. I've accumulated all these music reference books over the years and encyclopedias and stuff. When we're getting ready for these episodes, so I go and look up the artists we're going to talk about. They're not even in some of the books. They're not even in there, which is incredible to me,
the
because
biggest band in the world.
This album was number 1 for 15 weeks in the United States. 15 weeks.
Yeah.
And worldwide smash. Number 1 singles, worldwide smash. Second record, 2 more big hit singles in the United States. And then, bam, flop third record, band breaks up, and it's like they never existed. And then Colin Hay, which is really the draw of the documentary, is about this guy.
About and him. It's about him.
Yeah, it's not about the band. It's about Colin Hay, which is why they kind of brush over some things. I'd like to see a more all-encompassing documentary about the group. And then before we get off Down Under, we got to talk about the tragic story behind this record.
I didn't know about this until I watched that documentary.
I think I did know about it. I had just forgotten. I do recall. I mean, I vaguely recall hearing about this lawsuit, but years later, way later after it was a hit. Yeah. So there was I guess it was in Australia. There was like a quiz show, and one of the questions asked to the panel was, what popular hit song, incorporated this Australian nursery rhyme into it? And I never knew about any of this, but so there's this kind of like folk song nursery rhyme called Kookaburra Sits in the Old Gum Tree.
In the old gum tree.
Yeah. And the flute riff, the main hook riff that brings you into Down Under, sounds pretty similar to the melody of this nursery rhyme, Kookaburra. Well, it's a song that was written by a human being and published, and the ownership rights of this song passed on to this other company called Larrikin. And once they got wind of this, they're like, wait a minute here. We might have a lawsuit on our hands. They sued the songwriters, which were, Colin Hay, Ron Strikert, and then Greg Ham, who came up with that riff.
Yeah.
And they didn't get what they wanted, which was, I think, close to 50% of the publishing rights. They got, it was 5% only from a certain period of time forward, but still a song that was this massive. It's a not insignificant amount of money.
I think it was like $100,000 or something, though. It
Yeah.
wasn't a lot, considering how long the lawsuit went on and how much was spent on lawyer fees and all that.
Right. And also considering the fact that despite Men at Work having massive popularity and 2 huge hit albums, and even though it was, in comparison to Commercial Stiff, Too Hard still sold, I think, 750,000, the stinky third record in America. So, but Colin Hay solo career has done zero commercially. So none of these guys are making money anymore. The publishing rights, that's their income.
They have.
Yeah, it's all they've got. So Greg Ham became so despondent over this that, he didn't take his own life, but he, kind of spiraled in his personal life and was alcoholic and abusing drugs and died very young of a heart attack. Only a year after the lawsuit was finally settled.
It's devastating to him because he didn't want his legacy to be a song that was stolen from a nursery rhyme.
He took it very hard. And like I said, this guy was the secret weapon. I mean, his sax riff, the huge hook in Who Can It Be Now, the flute riff, the huge hook in Down Under, and just kind of added that flavor that made their songs special. And he was devastated by the lawsuit and its outcome and tragically passed away shortly thereafter. But watch the documentary. Colin Hay is still he's an incredible live performer to this day, usually just performing solo with acoustic guitar, still has a great voice, still hits those high notes with power. And he's a wonderful raconteur. I mean, he's great on stage with an audience. He's kind of a quirky live performer back in the day. When you look at the vintage live clips from like 82 and 83, I mean, what's striking is, A, the level of musicianship of the band. They're super tight. And then his vocals are note perfect, and they're effortless. The power when he hits those high notes, and he's barely moving,
Yeah.
I mean, he's not straining at all to hit those notes.
He has a powerful voice.
His mouth is opening. It's just coming out of there. And it's something to behold. His onstage persona wasn't particularly dynamic. I mean, he's pretty much standing there fairly expressionless, and then occasionally he gets these goofy looks on his face. But
which is kind of what he would do like in the video for like Who Can It Be Now? He'd have these funny little looks. But I think that when you watch that documentary and you see what he's doing now and has been for years, is that he's a storyteller. And him up on stage just with his acoustic guitar, and he is very riveting. He tells stories in between his songs, but it also really brings out how his songs themselves are stories, the depth behind his songs. And he also had to kind of go from being that new wave pop star to being just this acoustic solo act in a totally different realm. He's playing small theaters, and he even was in Ringo Starr's band for a while too. In the more recent years, he was part of Ringo's all-star band. But yeah, he had to basically just like start over from nothing.
They were the biggest band in the world, and a few years later, he had a club gig where nobody showed up.
No one showed up. Not one person.
It's amazing. Yeah. And he's very matter of fact about it. And he's like, I don't understand. It's like, I think I'm better. I mean, I've become a better songwriter, a better singer.
And he is. He's a great singer. He's a really good songwriter, and he's a really good performer. And he just kept going, even though he was playing gigs sometimes to not one person. He still kept going, and eventually kind of started to build a reputation as a solo performer, and then had that acoustic version of Overkill that was on Scrubs, because Zach Braff, I guess, was a big fan.
I knew none of this stuff. I never watched that show, so I didn't realize that he had this kind of second...
I watched Scrubs, so I remember when he was on it, and I just thought, oh my gosh, I love this song. And he has such an amazing voice, and it really comes out in that acoustic performance.
He really is one of the greatest vocalists of that era. I don't think there's any disputing that.
Yep. But I think that when he was on Scrubs, it opened up a whole new audience for him, and it gave him a second chance at his career. But he never stopped. He just kept slogging along and doing his thing. And then finally people realized, this guy is talented.
we don't get a lot of the details of the breakup of the band. So they kind of brush past it pretty quickly. So it was a dispute about the manager. They wanted to get a new manager. They didn't think their manager was, it was the same manager from when they were a pub band. And they're like, we're the biggest band in the world. We need to get a real shark. And Colin
That's a
Hay,
similar
again,
story that's happened with a lot of bands like the Go-Go's or,
well, I was going to draw the parallel to Philip Oakey. I mean, there's a loyalty
Mm.
factor there. I mean, the manager was a friend of Colin's, and he was not about to betray that. Obviously, the manager was doing okay. I mean, they went from nobodies to the biggest band in the world under his
Yeah.
watch. But anyway, yeah, so the documentary is interesting because you have this potpourri of famous talking heads. Zach Braff, just one of them, who loved the guy. And then his family. There's a real heart to that documentary. I mean, he seems like somebody who's just really well liked by
Mhm.
those around him. And he's a pretty down-to-earth guy. I mean, he's a troubadour in the truest sense of the word. He's
Yep.
not popular now. He was then, but it's not changed who he is. He's a guy who plays music for a living, goes on the road, plays in front of audiences, entertains them. That's what he does. That's his life, and he's going to continue to do that until he can't do it anymore.
Whether there's no one in the audience or,
Yeah.
thousands of people, he's still going to keep doing it because that's just who he is.
But yeah, there's certainly more Men at Work music to come on Matt and Sheryl's Gen Excellent playlist for sure. Before we sign up on this, I just want to look at the top 10, the first week of 1982. So these are all 1981 songs carrying into 1982.
Yeah.
But I don't see a bad song here, Sheryl. Number 1, Physical, probably my least favorite of the 10 songs in the top 10, but not a bad song for sure.
Yeah.
Waiting for a Girl Like You, Foreigner, number 2. Let's Groove, Earth, Wind, and Fire, could have very easily made our playlist for 81. I Can't Go For That, No Can Do, Daryl Hall and John Oates. Young Turks, certainly under consideration for me. I had the single when I was a kid, still like that song. Hard My Heart, Quarter Flash, that was a consideration. Leather and Lace, Stevie Nicks and Don Henley. Centerfold, Jay Giles Band, still at my 45 of that. Turn Your Love Around, George Benson, great song.
Love it. Yeah.
And Lindsey Buckingham, Trouble, number 10.
Ooh, one of my favorites.
Pretty good top 10 to ring in 1982.
Yeah, it is. And I can't see that that's going to continue happening as the years go on.
Now, number 11, I don't remember. Neil Diamond, Yesterday's Songs.
I do remember that only because I was a big Neil Diamond fan, and so was my mom, and that was not a good one. And in fact, that's the last album that he had, I believe, that he had any songs that were hits. Heartlight maybe was the next song.
Turn on your heart light. Let it shine wherever you go.
His love of E.T.
Speaking of which, a reference to E.T., which was the number 1 movie of 1982. Dallas, and CBS still dominating television in 1982. NBC, a distant third. That wouldn't last for much longer, but that's down the road in 83 and 84. The Dukes of Hazzard was a popular show on CBS that took a nosedive in the next TV season because I think John Schneider and Tom Wopat held out for new contracts, and they tried to replace them on the show for a while. Yeah. I don't remember that either.
That's not going to work. No.
Bad idea there, CBS.
No.
But yeah, CBS had the Dukes, they had MASH, they had Dallas. They were kind of dominating the ratings. NBC had the A-Team, but we're still a little ways off from must-see TV, which was more 83, 84. So speaking of top 10s, when we next get together, we're going to talk about a song that hit the top 10 in England, biggest hit for this group that was never more than a cult concern in the United States. But in my opinion, the closest we have come to the Beatles since the Beatles. And I don't think you're too much in disagreement with that, Tig.
No, I agree. Yep.
Until then, you've been listening to Matt and Sheryl's Gen Excellent playlist. I'm Matt.
I'm Sheryl.
And thanks for joining us, everybody. Take care.